So let's decode Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 103-minute-long address from the ramparts of the Red Fort on the journey for Atmanirbhar Bharat and a Vikasit Bharat by 2047. Joining me on this special 79th Independence Day special broadcast is Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan. He is a former member of the National Security Advisory Board and former defense attaché in the Embassy of India in China, has commanded a corps in the Northeast. Ambassador K.C. Singh is former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, former ambassador. Professor Andrew Latham is a distinguished scholar of international security and strategic studies, joins us on this broadcast, as does Sandeep Punithan, senior journalist, and my colleague. General Narasimhan, the Prime Minister spoke of India exposing Pakistan's nuclear bogey, words to the effect that we will not tolerate their nuclear threats or distinguish between terrorists and their sponsors. He spoke of precision strikes into enemy territory, showed our aggressive stance to cross-border terrorism during Operation Sindoor. Your appreciation of the message the Prime Minister was trying to send out, some of what he said had been said by him before.
Good evening, and thank you very much for getting me on your show. This is something which has been happening ever since 2016 onwards, when we did the surgical strikes. In 2019, we did the Balakot strike, and in 2025, of course, Operation Sindoor. So this is a, I would say, a step-by-step kind of a reaction to what Pakistan has been doing, and conveying the message very clearly that Pakistan has always been saying for the last about 25 years that, we have a nuclear weapon and so you can't do anything to us. So this bluff has been called. I have been saying that this bluff should be called, and this bluff has been called very clearly from 2016 onwards, and in 2025 much more clearly. The other thing that he talked about is on the defense against any kind of aerial attack, the Sudarshan Chakra that he talked about. That is going to be a major game changer in our defense of our territory. So what has happened in Sindoor is, you found the attack by missiles and drones. Now, this could extend to anything else. So we need to be very, very clear and very, very prepared to meet any kind of threat that could come. Please don't forget that Pakistan has just announced yesterday creation of a rocket force command. So that is again a thing that we need to take note of. So we need to be prepared, and the very fact that it is going to be indigenously produced is something which is of a great importance, and it is of a great pride and importance for us.
Okay, so let's talk about the Sudarshan Chakra, the shield, the kavach that the Prime Minister spoke of, Sandeep. Before I bring in Professor Andrew Latham, this is not just like India's Iron Dome or, America's proposed Golden Dome. This is much more. This has a counter-strike capability. So this is going in line with India's policy of defensive offense or offensive defense, the way you may want to look at it. Explain this, Sandeep.
Absolutely, Gaurav. In fact, what the Prime Minister has outlined today, the Sudarshan Chakra, seems to be a ballistic missile defense plus. Now, we've heard of a BMD capability that India has been working on for more than 3 decades now. This has been a top priority for us ever since Pakistan acquired the M11 ballistic missiles from China in the 1990s, nearly 3 decades ago. And ever since, we've been trying to develop this BMD capability. Of course, some of that exists in the current form. We've seen it in Operation Sindoor. Yes. Multi-tiered defense. And now what seems to be the Sudarshan Chakra would be to add several tiers to IACCS, which would be a ballistic missile defense system integrating indigenous missiles and radars with the IACCS, and also elements of the rocket force that India is proposed to add to this to completely negate Pakistan's edge. Pakistan's ballistic missiles are on TELs, transport erector launchers. This aims to be a missile shield of the kind that would shoot down several missiles of the kind that Pakistan fired. If you remember, Gaurav, during Operation Sindoor, there was at least one ballistic missile that Pakistan fired, which was intercepted near Sirsa. It was fired towards Delhi, it's believed. the Sudarshan Chakra would be a Raj system that would not only protect against such kind of ballistic missile attacks, but also launch counter attacks, retaliatory strikes using our own hypersonic missiles and air-launched systems of the kind that we've seen during Operation Sindoor. So it's actually a system.
And what a journey we've covered, Sandeep and General Narasimhan. Before I bring in Professor Andrew Latham, during the Kargil War of 1999, India so desperately missed the ANTPQ-37 weapon locating radars that America had promised but did not deliver because of the post-Pokhran sanctions that were imposed on India, and the Pakistani counter-bombardment impacted us adversely. In a similar situation 25 years later, when India-America relations not at their best, India is much, much better prepared and now is talking about not just a defensive, but an offensive capability. General Narasimhan, I'll come to you, but I want to bring in Professor Andrew Latham and Ambassador K.C. Singh into this conversation. Professor Latham, what's the signal that you got from the Prime Minister's address from the ramparts of the Red Fort? His longest so far, 103 minutes, the longest so far was the last year, 2024. But the military signal and the diplomatic signal and the big push for Atmanirbhar or self-reliant India in manufacturing.
Yes, well, there's a number of themes there, one of which is the self-reliance. And despite the fact that those engines are going to be made in India, one of the questions that wasn't answered is who's going to make them? Will it be General Electric? Will it be an Indian firm? That remains to be seen. But still, the production is going to be onshored, to use an Americanism, onshored to India. With respect to the second set of issues having to do with India's grand strategy vis-a-vis Pakistan, I think it's clear that India has a no first use doctrine. Pakistan has a full spectrum deterrence doctrine, which means that Pakistan reserves the right to use nuclear weapons if they are being defeated in a conventional war. Now, that combination has proven to be stable in the sense that there have been multiple crises which have sometimes approached the nuclear threshold, but clearly have never exceeded the nuclear threshold. There's never been a nuclear exchange. India
To
has
the best
been
of my
pushing
knowledge, it's never
parameters.
even approached a nuclear threshold, but you may like to enlighten us. When, in your appreciation, did it reach the nuclear threshold, sir? We've had conventional conflicts many times. When did it reach a nuclear threshold?
Well, India's doctrine has changed in the last year or so, maybe a few years before that. So India now says that we're not going to be deterred by Pakistani nuclear weapons. So Operation Sindoor is the obvious example. They've simply struck not only terrorist and militant sites, but Pakistani military infrastructure as well. And that invited a response, a retaliation, including, as you just pointed out, as somebody just pointed out, a ballistic missile strike on India. Who knows what was on the end of that ballistic missile? It was conventional, but it might have been nuclear. The big question here is, how do these various doctrinal and technological innovations affect stability? Are they likely to make the relationship less stable and more inclined to spiral into a nuclear exchange? Or are they going to have the impact of reinforcing stability so that the conflict will be at sub-nuclear levels forever, which is in everybody's interest, by the way, not just India and Pakistan. It will have impact on global climate. It will have all kinds of impacts beyond just those two countries. So I think that when Modi is making this speech, obviously it's for internal consumption, but he's signaling quite strongly that India is its nuclear doctrine and the technological underpinnings of that doctrine are evolving and shifting. And the question for us is, as observers, as analysts, is that going to contribute to stability, or is that going to make the likelihood of inadvertent nuclear war more likely?
Okay, but again, General Narasimhan, is this the nuclear bogey that the world falls for? 1999, I was covering the Kargil War. It was a sub-conventional conflict restricted to 2 sectors. It did not even escalate, and that was immediately after the nuclear test of 1998. This was in 1999. 2016, you've had surgical strikes. 2019, you've had Balakot airstrikes. When fighter jets crossed the line of control and hit across the international border, there was no escalation even to a full-fledged conventional war, let alone reaching the nuclear threshold. So, Pakistan's army chief in Tampa, Florida, may want to raise that nuclear bogey. There is no nuclear bogey. That's the point that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to make through Operation Sindoor. It did not even result in escalation of conflict to full spectrum, let alone a nuclear conflict. General Narasimhan.
You see, absolutely, Gaurav. The issue that we need to keep in mind is, if one side keeps threatening that I will use the nuclear weapon, will that lead to stability? I'm sure that will also not lead to stability. So the issue is that they should be put on caution to say that you do something which is drastic, you will get it back more than what you were expecting. And that is the message that the Prime Minister was wanting to give today. And I think it is the correct message to go. So that when Chief of Pakistan Army goes on to US and then says that we will take half the world down if we are going down. So what is the other half the world going to do? Are they going to look for stability? So the issue that comes up is that Pakistan should be put on notice that you should not try anything drastic. If you do, you will get back more than double, more than triple of the same coin that you are trying to do. So this is something I think we need to convey very clearly, and that is what the Prime Minister did. As far as the doctrine is concerned, we maintain our doctrine of no first use, and that we are very clear. But the result of that particular doctrine lies in the clause that says that if there was any kind of nuclear threshold crossed on India, the retaliation is going to be massive. That is where I think that message should go back very clearly, and that is what probably the Prime Minister did today from the ramparts of Old Delhi.
Okay. Okay, before I bring in Sandeep, Professor McAllister, does the West fail to appreciate the nuances or this nuclear bogey? Because it was Pakistan's army chief who was in Tampa, Florida, who's reported to have said that if Pakistan faced an existential crisis, they will take half the world down with it. Admonishment should have come there for Pakistan, and there was none. What explains this attitude, if you'd like to analyze, the role of the West here?
Well, none of this is new to people who have been involved in nuclear issues in the West and in the Soviet Union and in China. I can boil it down to the danger of brinkmanship. The Pakistani general making those noises in Florida, he's trying to signal, but he's raising the stakes. And when Modi, I think, made a rational set of statements, to be sure, he's also signaling, but in a way that kind of raises the stakes. And, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes, Mark Twain. And we look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example. We look at 1984, another crisis. Able Archer was the exercise which triggered that. We like to think that we are rational animals, and by and large, we generally speaking are, but irrationality is part of the human condition, and things can get out of control. And this signaling, this saber rattling, if you like, on both parts,
it's
really
actually
does
not on both parts, it's on the Pakistani part.
Oh, believe me, I think the primary culprit in this very much is the Pakistani government, but India's response also contributes to this. Even though it's rational and perfectly understandable, it also contributes to this brinkmanship and this spiral. And there needs to be a way to, cooler heads need to prevail at the end of the day. And they have so far in that relationship. In 1999, they had, both sides had detonated nuclear weapons, but they had no delivery systems. I mean, that's not really a case that even rhymes, let alone repeats. But since then, there have been times where it could have escalated. And as you pointed out, it didn't escalate. Cooler heads prevailed. Do you want to really roll the dice in perpetuity, hoping that cooler heads will always prevail as less cool heads are ramping up the signaling, developing new weapon systems, some of which may contribute to stability, some of which might undermine stability? If, for example, you have a perfect ballistic missile defense system in India, 5 minutes before you turn it on and basically neutralize Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, what's the rational thing for Islamabad to do? They're not going to sit on their hands.
Well, the rational thing that they did this time in Operation Sindoor, and if you go by what's happened on ground, on a bent knee, they sought ceasefire. Because we must keep in mind what's happened so far. Whether you look at what happened in 1971, Pakistan begged for a ceasefire. of course, they had to surrender. When you look at every other operation that's happened, and let's go by history, instead of just thinking or wargaming that, you know, it'll escalate to a nuclear spiral, Sandeep, what happened here? After India hit 11 air bases, took down 6 radars, threatened to take down more in case Pakistan escalated, Pakistan realized India could conventionally take down all their air bases and they wouldn't have an air force. On the 10th, Pakistan didn't have an air force that could fly. So if we were to just look at it dispassionately and rationally, Pakistan sought a ceasefire, did not even think of escalating it to the nuclear threshold because they knew the consequences would have been worse for them.
Absolutely, Gaurav. And you know what Pakistan has done over the last couple of decades, and this is no nuclear armed country has ever done this, is nuclear weapons enabled terrorism. It's NWET. It basically uses nuclear weapons as a shield to protect Pakistan's so-called death by 1,000 cuts. Use of terrorism as an instrument of state policy. Virtually, we've seen that happening after Kargil in Jammu and Kashmir, the parliament attack, Mumbai 26/11, the train bombings in Mumbai in 2006. There are endless instances of terrorism that Pakistan actors have perpetrated on Indian citizens. The choice was to either double down and take these blows and protect all your citizens and your cities, by defending them with greater security thing, or the choice was to hit out and go and raise the cost of Pakistan's sponsorship of terror, which this government seems to have done, as General Narasimhan pointed out, very gradually. From 2016, it was shallow cross-border raids. In 2019, it was a single airstrike against a single camp. And in 2025, you've seen with Operation Sindoor, it was a mass targeting of Pakistani terrorist infrastructure, followed by air bases. And this possibly struck at the root of Pakistan's nuclear deterrence strategy, which is what has rattled them so much, and which is why Munir is making the kind of statements that he's been making in the last couple of months, because Pakistan completely was taken by surprise, Gaurav, on the 10th of May. We completely underestimated the importance of what happened on the 10th of May. This has never happened in the history of it's been 80 years since nuclear weapons were used on Hiroshima and
Second World War by the Americans.
The Second World War, and this is the first time that one country has struck at another nuclear-armed country using the Air Force in such a devastating fashion, which is why Pakistan is rattled, because this carefully constructed strategy of nuclear weapons-enabled terrorism, Gaurav, which Pakistan has practiced for more than a quarter of a century, is finally unraveling. They are having to pay the bills for it. It's no longer a low-cost solution. It's a very high-cost, strategy for them. It's ruined their bases. It's destroyed them. It's changed India's strategy. It's become a proactive strategy now, where terrorism can no longer be used as an instrument of state policy, and nuclear blackmail can certainly not be allowed to happen. And that is what Pakistan is really, really frightened about. Their strategy is unraveling, and they are rattled, Gaurav.
And India wants to move forward on the Atmanirbhar Bharat route. Before I bring in Professor Latham, General Narasimhan, Professor Latham had raised a very important point. While we talk of that Atmanirbhar Bharat route, the Prime Minister also referred to Make in India jet engine. Now, while we aspire to make the jet engines at home, the Kaveri engine that we've worked on so hard for the past so many decades, it's reached thus far and sadly no further. What's the road ahead? Because he said, "Hame Bharat mein banana chahiye. We should make a jet engine in India." But till that happens, and the Americans, untrustworthy after 1984, when our entire GE 404 campaign suffered, LCS suffered because of that after Pokhran tests, and unfortunately, GE 404 engines have been delayed once again by over 2 years. Some have they've pledged they're sending more. They haven't come in, General Narasimhan.
This is very true. In fact, if you look at the history of countries which wanted to become self-reliant as far as armed forces are concerned, aero engines has been one of the major problems. Even China is struggling with it, and it's just come up with the initial lot of engines which is powering their aircraft. The thing required is a focused kind of an approach to develop that engine indigenously. Kaveri engine, the problem with that was it didn't have enough thrust. So we should probably take the technology and then start working. That is one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is technology transfer from external sources to be made in India. Basically, a couple of things are actually required. One is the metallurgy. Second is the thermal dynamics. These two are the ones which are actually holding back. I think if we can overcome that, we should be
Yes.
able to produce them indigenously. So both the options are open at this point in time, and I'm sure both the options will be pursued. Kaveri engine, as you are aware, Gaurav and Sandeep, now it is being tried out to actually power the drones at this point in time.
Absolutely.
So some
Absolutely.
use is being made of Kaveri engines, but that has to be taken forward and see where it goes. I think both the approaches will be open to working.
And on a war footing. But Professor Latham, is the relationship with the United States, in your appreciation, right now facing very severe headwinds? Some in the United States, including the Treasury Secretary, warn of additional tariffs on India if there is no deal between Putin and Trump later today, and India insisting on this Atmanirbhar Bharat push the road ahead and no compromise with the interests of farmers, fishermen, and animal husbandry workers.
I think this is a moment of turbulence. When I look at the longer term relationship and I look at the evolutionary trajectory of that relationship, I think it is natural for India and the United States to have a stronger, more balanced economic relationship and a much stronger geopolitical or strategic relationship. They have at least one common adversary, the People's Republic of China. They both have an interest in stabilizing the Indo-Pacific region and blunting China's attempts to dominate that region. Do they have differences? Yes, of course they do. Canada and the United States have differences as well. I mean, the countries have different national interests. Sometimes that generates friction. Right now, it's generating friction, and it's generating friction not so much because of India-United States relations, but this Russian war in Ukraine is really complicating things ultimately. There are it needs to be underscored always that the most wealthy demographic in the United States is the Indian diaspora. And that wealth now is beginning to be translated into political influence. And it naturally, originally gravitated towards the Democratic Party, but under Trump, initially was beginning to migrate towards the Republican Party. And now what the things that Trump and his administration have been doing have stopped that migration and reversed it partly. But future Republican administrations are likely to try to reach out to that demographic again for domestic electoral purposes. And so that's something that has to be factored into the equation as well. I see 5-10 years from now, India and the US being close economic and strategic partners, and looking back on this moment as, oh, that was really unfortunate. How did we allow that to happen? Let's move on.
Let's move on. Let's sincerely hope, the two strong democracies are able to complement each other. But will they, or will there be more turbulence ahead? We will track that story very closely. It's always great to talk to you, Jal Narasimhan, Sandeep, and Professor Latham for joining me here on this part of India First. Many thanks.